My mother was adjusting Sophie's veil when Michael and I arrived at the church. Her hands moved with care, smoothing the lace as if it were sacred. I hadn't seen that look on her face in years, a look of focus, radiance, and tenderness. Certainly not on my wedding day. The thought came to me before I could stop it, and I swallowed it down as I always do. Sophie, my little sister, was getting married. A kindergarten teacher, the joy of everyone, the golden girl. And today the sun shone just for her. My husband, Michael, leaned toward me as we sat down. He gently squeezed my hand. 10,000 in my inside pocket, he said, patting his jacket. Are you sure about that? I nodded. It's her wedding. He didn't say anything more. We'd already paid a third of the reception costs, but I didn't want to discuss finances today. This wasn't the time, I told myself. That became my mantra. As I sat, I glanced up at the rows in front of me. My father, Robert, was laughing with one of Sophie's relatives. He looked younger than I remembered, his shirt tucked into his trousers, his tie neat and straight, his back upright. He was used to curtsying. My mother, Margaret, sat beside him, turning occasionally to check on the altar, as if she couldn't quite believe this day was really happening. Her eyes met mine once, and she gave me a polite smile. I smiled back and she turned away. There was no coldness, just a distance, as if I were someone else's cousin, not her eldest daughter. The music started. Sophie entered with Robert, and Margaret's eyes immediately filled with tears. Michael leaned slightly towards me, until his shoulder touched mine. I don't think he meant anything by it. Perhaps he just knew. The ceremony was short, tender, and traditional. Sophie cried as they exchanged vows. Her new husband, Nathan, nearly choked back tears as well. They both looked happy, even radiant. As they kissed, the guests applauded and stood, some taking out their phones. I applauded too. My palms felt stiff. I hadn't expected to feel so detached. But seeing my parents beaming with joy, as if nothing else in the world mattered except this moment, affected me more than I had thought possible. I told myself I was being sensitive, that I was overthinking things. Still, I couldn't help wondering. Had they ever looked at me like that? The reception was held in a converted barn. White lights hung from the walls, and there were various wooden chairs and lavender pinned to each napkin. The party was elegant, expensive, and impeccably organized. I knew this because I had helped organize it. However, no one mentioned it explicitly. Dinner passed quickly in friendly conversation. Michael chatted with Uncle Nathan about the estate. I ate my chicken slowly. My parents sat at the long main table next to Sophie and Nathan, smiling like royalty. I stayed in the second row with Michael, smiling whenever someone looked at us, and nodding when Sophie glanced at us. Then came the congratulatory remarks. The best man, a friend of Nathan's from college, was brief and filled with their own jokes. The bridesmaid, her close childhood friend, burst into tears mid-speech. Then my mother rose, holding a glass of champagne in both hands. My father stood beside her, clearing his throat. My mother began by saying, "Thank you all," then tapped her glass once. "We are so grateful to see so many of you here to celebrate our beloved daughter's wedding." The word beloved felt like a pinprick to my chest. Robert added, "She's always brought us joy. She's always been an inspiration and a light." Michael's hand slid over mine again. I smiled faintly and nodded the same way I had at my wedding when my mother stood up and simply said, "We're so happy Sarah has found her life partner." But now their smiles radiated pure joy. My mother reached into her small bag and pulled out a small wad of papers. Nathan and Sophie," she corrected herself with a laugh. "Your father and I wanted to give you something of value, something to start your life together with." Holding up the papers, she said, "We're giving you the family home." The words fell like stones in a silent room. Then there was a roar of applause and cheers, and their glasses clinked together. The people stood and clapped. Sophie covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. Nathan looked stunned. I felt nothing at first, not even shock. I just stared. Michael froze beside me. The house. That house. The same house I'd been paying off for 5 years. The same house my parents begged me to help save when Dad's hours at the factory were cut, and Mom's arthritis made full-time work impossible. We never made a formal agreement. No contracts, no paperwork, just, "Honey, we're behind on the payment. We would pay you back if we could." And I quietly agreed, every month for 5 years. They didn't mention this plan even once. No warning, no discussion. I remained silent. No smile appeared on my face. Sophie cried and hugged our parents. Nathan kissed her on the cheek. The people around us were whispering, "What generosity, what beauty, what a blessing." Michael leaned towards him. "Do you know?" I shook my head, my lips pursed. When Sophie walked past our table later, she pressed her hand against my shoulder and whispered, "Can you believe it?" Her eyes sparkled like she'd just won the lottery. But there was something more to it, something a little too quiet. She knew. Michael and I left an hour later, early enough not to cause any fuss. I told some people, "Michael has an early meeting. I'm very happy for them. I'm just tired." In the car, I didn't say a word until we reached the highway. That's when my tears started flowing. I clutched my dress as if I were going to tear it off. I said in a broken voice, "I don't care about the house, I care about not asking. It's pretending that I was never a part of it." Michael didn't answer immediately. His hand remained steady on the steering wheel. "You were more than just a part of it. You carried it on your shoulders. They simply didn't want to remember that." We walked home in silence. It wasn't a profound silence, but a silence born of exhaustion. A silence that renders words inadequate to express what we're holding back. I washed my face and put on my pajamas before uttering another word. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, untying his shoelaces. He looked at me as if waiting, gently as he always did. I finally said, "They didn't hesitate for a moment. They stood there and blurted out the secret as if I were just a footnote." He didn't interrupt me. He knew perfectly well that one shouldn't rush into such grief. I sat beside him, feeling the softness of my robe's fabric between my fingers. "It's not just the house," I whispered. "They didn't even consider the possibility of me getting hurt." Michael placed his hand on mine, warm and firm. And that's when the rest started to flow. I told him about my graduation, how my mom gave me a card with $50 and told me to spend it wisely. And how, 2 years later, Sophie got a silver Honda with a big red ribbon in the front door. "She's just starting out," they said, as if I wasn't. I told him about my 21st birthday, and how my mom and dad said they couldn't come to dinner because Sophie had a volleyball game. Not a tournament, just a game. And they'd already promised her they wouldn't. I remembered things I'd forgotten. How my dad would answer Sophie's calls on the first ring, while mine went straight to voicemail. And the time my mom missed my promotion party to look after Sophie's dog. Michael listened silently, but with those wrinkles between his eyes that only appeared when something was really hurting him on my behalf. I said, "I didn't care then. I convinced myself they were just busy, and that I was overreacting." I looked at my lap. Now I feel like I was invisible. Just someone they depend on when they need money, not someone they love. Michael moved closer. "You weren't invisible to me." I rested my head on his shoulder. He smelled like clean linen and perfume like home. I said, "I kept thinking if I had tried harder, helped more, they would have seen me. They would have really seen me." He didn't say what I already knew. They saw exactly what they wanted. And what they wanted was someone who wouldn't ask for anything in return. 3 weeks passed. I kept silent at work, answering only essential calls, and leaving my phone upside down every evening. No one mentioned the wedding. No one mentioned the house. The silence was both a blessing and a punishment. Then one evening, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen since that night. "Mom, Margaret." I stared at the phone for 2 rings, then 3, then I answered. Her voice came through clear, as if nothing had happened. "Sarah, darling, we're having a small family dinner this weekend. Sophie and Nathan are back from their honeymoon. We'd love to see you and Michael. Just a casual dinner." I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up. But a calm, irrational part of me, the part that still hoped for fairness, thought that maybe they would apologize or at least explain. So I said, "Okay, we'll come." Saturday came quickly. Michael was driving. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, staring out the window. The closer we got, the more it felt like we were approaching someone else's house, not the one I was paying for. Sophie's SUV was parked in the driveway. My parents' old car was next to it. I hesitated at the front door before ringing the bell. I no longer had a key. Margaret opened the door. Her cheeks flushed as if she'd been laughing. "Sarah, Michael, come in." She hugged me as if nothing had happened. I nervously let her in. Inside, Robert was watching a game with Nathan. He shook Michael's hand warmly, then gave me a light hug. "Glad you came," he said, his eyes returning to the screen. I scanned the room with my eyes. "Where's Sophie?" My mother said cheerfully. "She's changing the curtains in the dining room. She's been redecorating the house all week." I followed the sound of the fabric and its soft rustle. There she was, standing on a small step, replacing my mother's old blue curtains with cream-colored ones. She looked down, smiled, and said nothing. Dinner was slow-cooked roast beef made by my mother, the dish she usually prepared when guests came over. The table was packed, and I sat between Michael and Robert. Across from me sat Margaret and Sophie. Nathan sat at the far end. Sophie and Nathan spent the first 10 minutes recounting every detail of their honeymoon in Maui. Every meal, every animal drawing on a towel, every dive spot. I nodded when it seemed appropriate. Michael asked just enough questions to keep the conversation flowing. Then Margaret cleared her throat. "So," she began softly, "we wanted to talk to you about something, Sarah. Here it is. As you know, we gave the house to Sophie and Nathan. They're starting their life together. They need space." I nodded slowly, giving her space to continue. Robert shifted in his seat. "What your mother is trying to say is that we can't stay here anymore." I put my fork aside. Margaret said, "We've decided we'd like to move into your lake cottage. It's perfect for us. Quiet, peaceful, and just the right size." I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence stretch on until everyone noticed. I said, "Let me understand this properly. I gave the house that I was paying for to Sophie, and now she wants to move into my property without permission. Robert frowned. Be reasonable, Sarah. Where are we supposed to go? I said, that's not my problem. Sophie entered his voice, saying, it's not as if you use it a lot. I turned to her and said, she's mine. I bought her. I decide who's inside her. Margaret's face softened. You don't say no, do you? I said calmly, I am. No, you will not move into my cottage. 2 weeks passed without me hearing a word from them. I blocked their numbers, not forever, just so I could think in peace. The cabin remained in my mind calm and safe, like a door I had locked tightly. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, as I was reviewing the notice on my desk, my phone rang. Security alert. Front door open, Pine Ridge Cottage. I was scared. I opened the app. Apparently, someone had used a key but hadn't disabled the alarm. 30 seconds later, the security company called. Ms. Whitman, this is Safeguard Security. We detected an intrusion at your property on Pine Ridge Road. Was it you? I said, no, send the police. An hour later, my phone rang again. The voice was a calm man. Miss Whitman, this is Officer Davis from the County Sheriff's Department. We are now at your home in Pine Ridge with 2 people claiming to be your parents. They have keys, but they admit they do not have your permission to be here. I closed my eyes. Of course it was them. I said, yes, they are my parents, but they don't have permission to be in my house. I understand that. Because they used a key and not force, it's unclear. We can get them out, but bringing charges is up to you. I said, I'll go up. We're about an hour away. Michael drove us. Neither of us spoke much. I was too angry to speak, too tired to shout. In the midst of that silence, I realized I wasn't surprised. I felt pain, yes, but I wasn't surprised. The cottage came into view as we turned around the bend. Pine trees, gravel crunching under tires, a police car ahead, 2 officers, and on the porch, Robert and Margaret sitting stiffly among some bags and plastic crates. Robert stopped when he saw me. Sarah, thank God. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I walked past him and headed towards the officers. Thank you for coming. Yes, these are my parents, but they don't have permission to be here. One of the officers nodded. Do you want to file a complaint? Margaret stopped now. Sarah, you won't do that. I said, you broke into my house after I told you no. What did you think would happen? Robert raised his voice. We didn't break in. We used the key you gave us. Margaret's voice suddenly broke. This is all your fault. If you had let us stay, none of this would have happened. I stared at her. What did I do wrong? You gave up a house I was paying for, and then you tried to take over my other property without even asking my permission. And now you sit here acting like I'm the one who betrayed you. She said disdainfully, you are so arrogant, so selfish. We raised you better than this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You didn't raise me to be submissive. That silenced her. I turned to the officers and said, may I speak with you privately? They stepped aside with me. I took a deep breath and said, I don't want to file a complaint, but I don't want them here either. One of the officers said, we can bring them in for a few hours. Let them calm down. Sometimes a holding cell puts them in perspective. I nodded. That seems right. I went back to the balcony and simply said, they're going to take you for a few hours. I'm not going to complain, but you can't stay here. Margaret looked stunned. Robert didn't say a word. As the patrol car drove away, Michael placed his hand in mine. We waited for the locksmith. While he worked, I arranged for their belongings to be moved to a nearby storage unit. I paid 1 month's rent. I sent the information to Sophie. I didn't open any of the doors. By the time the new locks were in place, the house felt clean again. It was home again. 2 days later, I opened Facebook and saw my mother's smiling face in a post I never expected and will never forget. Today, I learned what it means to be abandoned by your own son. The comment went on for 6 paragraphs. How she and Robert were thrown out in their old age like unwanted pets. How I, their eldest daughter, called the police and forced them out of the house like criminals, leaving them homeless. Without a roof, without mercy. The post was public. Dozens of comments already appeared. Some were from old neighbors, some from family, and some from people I hadn't seen since childhood. I can't believe she did that to you. So many kids these days have no sense of responsibility. That girl was always so cold, even in church. I sat there staring at my screen, letting the bitterness rise slowly and steadily, until Michael leaned over and read it with me. He asked me gently, will you reply? I did not reply immediately. I opened a blank page and began to write. Since my mother chose to publicize our private dispute, I feel I need to share some facts. I wrote carefully, not angrily, but clearly. I recounted how I had paid their mortgage for 5 years, how they had gifted that house to Sophie and Nathan without telling me, and how they had planned to move into my lakeside cottage without asking permission. When I refused, I explained how they had used a spare key and entered my property without authorization, requiring police intervention. I concluded simply. Family is built on mutual respect, not entitlement, and certainly not on rewriting history. Then I pressed the publish button. The response came quickly. Messages, comments, and private messages from my cousins. We had no idea. From my aunt in Ohio. You should have told me sooner. Your mother's story didn't make sense. Even Robert's former co-worker. You paid the mortgage installments? Then she donated the house? Oh my God. The shame remained, but the burden of responsibility had shifted. I wasn't seeking revenge, but I was tired of the silence. 3 days later, my cousin Claire called me. I just wanted you to know, she said in a low voice. Your parents tried to come back home. I didn't say anything, I waited. Sophie wouldn't let them in, she continued. She told them it was her house now, and they had no place there. I let the words sink in, not out of disbelief, but simply for confirmation. Claire sighed and said, They're staying in a small flat near Highway 12. A very small flat with a monthly lease. Your mother got a part-time job at the pharmacy. She says it's temporary. She thanked her and hung up. Michael looked up from the sink as she entered the kitchen. What's up? I said. They went to Sophie's house, but she refused to let them in. He raised his eyebrows and asked, After all that? I nodded. They're living in a rented apartment now, and their mother's back at work. I expected to feel good. But I didn't. I felt tired. That night, I stared at my phone for a long time. A new voicemail, my mother's voice quieter than I remembered. We've made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Please call us. We need to talk. I deleted it. Maybe someday I'd like to hear her say those words. But not now. Not now when everything is still so sharp. Instead, I put the lake cottage up for rent. I no longer needed it empty and echoing. It could pay for itself. Someone else could enjoy a coffee on the terrace. Michael asks us as we get ready for bed. Do you think you will ever forgive them? I thought about it. Maybe. Not for their sake. For mine. He nodded and turned off the light. I lay in the darkness and breathed. I no longer strived to be the favorite. I no longer even sought to be understood. The next morning, the phone rang again. I let it ring. There was no voicemail this time. Perhaps she didn't know what to say. Perhaps that silence was her way of finally listening. I watched the screen until it went dark. Outside, the sky was overcast, a pale gray that promised rain, but not a downpour, just a gentle, slow drizzle. I poured my coffee, sat by the window, and didn't answer. If Sophie is the daughter they chose, then they can live with that choice.
सर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर बढ़ता है अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम सर्द लगता है दिल का हर बहुत ही मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी रूह का मका तू लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा मगर खामोश है दुनिया कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर, दर्द का असर।